The gunshot echoed across the dusty streets of Julian, Arizona, startling Abigail Turner from her fitful sleep. Her trembling hands clutched the thin, tattered blanket to her chest as she listened for the heavy footfalls of Madame Lucille ascending the creaking staircase. Just another drunken cowboy settling a score, nothing more. But in that moment, Abigail knew tonight would be her last in this gilded prison. The year was 1878, and at 22, Abigail had spent 3 long years behind the scarlet curtains of the Velvet Rose, Julian's most notorious brothel. Once a hopeful young woman from Boston with dreams of teaching in the West, she'd been lured by false promises and trapped in debt bondage by Madame Lucille and her partner, the ruthless Vernon Pike. The familiar sounds of raucous laughter, piano music, and clinking glasses drifted up through the floorboards. Downstairs, the night's revelry continued unabated while Abigail meticulously folded her one decent dress, a simple blue cotton garment with only minor tears at the hem, into a small bundle. She had been planning this escape for months, hiding away coins whenever a client felt generous, enough now for a stagecoach ticket eastward. If she could just make it to the station before dawn. She pulled on her threadbare boots and tucked her mother's silver locket, the only possession from her former life, inside her chemise. With trembling fingers, she secured the small pouch of coins in her undergarments. The room she shared with 2 other girls was empty tonight. Both were downstairs entertaining clients, which meant her window of escape was now or never. Pressing her ear to the door, Abigail listened for movement in the hallway. Hearing nothing, she slowly turned the knob and slipped into the dimly lit corridor. The musty scent of tobacco, whiskey, and cheap perfume assaulted her senses as she crept toward the back staircase, the one used by the cook and housemaid. Heart pounding against her ribs, she descended each step with painstaking care, wincing at every creak of the worn wood beneath her feet. One wrong move, one misplaced step, and all would be lost. The punishment for attempted escape was severe. She still bore the scars from when Madame Lucille had caught her speaking to the sheriff's deputy 6 months prior. The back door was just ahead, partially obscured by stacked crates and empty liquor bottles. Freedom beckoned beyond that weathered threshold, though what awaited her outside was uncertain at best. Julian might be a growing mining town, but at this late hour, the streets belonged to drunks, gamblers, and men who wouldn't hesitate to return her to Madame Lucille for a reward. Abigail froze as a shadow moved across the kitchen doorway. She pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe, until the cook's snoring resumed from his chair by the stove. With shaking hands, she lifted the latch on the back door and eased it open just enough to slip through. The night air hit her like salvation, cool and crisp compared to the stifling heat and heavy perfume of the brothel. For a moment, she simply stood there, drawing deep breaths of freedom into her lungs before darting into the shadows of the alley. Julian slumbered under a canopy of stars, the main street eerily quiet save for the distant piano from the saloon and occasional bursts of laughter. Abigail kept to the shadows, moving swiftly yet cautiously toward the edge of town. The stagecoach station was nearly a mile away, and she'd need to hide somewhere until morning when the first coach departed. She had barely reached the end of the alley when a rough hand clamped over her mouth and another gripped her arm. Well, what do we have here? Madame's prize songbird fly in the coop. Vernon Pike's whiskey-soaked breath was hot against her ear. You know the rules, darlin'. Nobody leaves till their debt's paid. Abigail struggled against his iron grip, her muffled cries lost to the night. Vernon was Madame Lucille's business partner and occasional lover, a man whose cruelty was legendary throughout the territory. Her heart sank as he began dragging her back toward the velvet rose. "You're gonna regret this little adventure," he hissed, tightening his grip until she whimpered in pain. "Madam's got special plans for girls who don't know their place." Desperate, Abigail sank her teeth into his hand. Vernon howled in pain and momentarily loosened his grip. It was all the opportunity she needed. She stomped hard on his instep and tore free from his grasp, bolting down the street with the bundle clutched to her chest. "You bitch!" Vernon's roar echoed behind her. "I'll find you. There ain't nowhere in this town you can hide." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she ran, her lungs burning with each ragged breath. She darted between buildings, desperate to put as much distance as possible between herself and Vernon. The sound of his boots pounding the dirt behind her drove her forward despite the stitch forming in her side. As she rounded the corner near the livery stable, she collided hard with something solid. Strong hands caught her before she could fall. Abigail looked up, terrified, into the face of a man she didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered, his features partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Please," she gasped, trying to pull away. "Please, I can't go back there." The stranger's grip on her arms loosened slightly, but he didn't release her. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "Who's after you?" Before she could answer, Vernon's voice rang out from the street. "Isaiah, that you? Got one of Madam's girls making a run for it. Grab her." The man, Isaiah, looked down at Abigail, then back toward Vernon's approaching figure. Something in his expression shifted as he took in her tear-streaked face and terrified eyes. "Get behind me," he murmured, releasing her arms and gently pushing her behind his tall frame. Vernon appeared, breathless and furious, his face flushed red with exertion and drink. "There you are, you little—" He stopped short when he saw Isaiah. "Thompson, what the hell you doing?" Isaiah Thompson stood his ground, one hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "Evening, Pike." "Seems to me this lady doesn't want to go with you." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "Lady, she's property and she owes Madam plenty. Now step aside." "I don't reckon I will." Isaiah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Way I see it, no person can be property in this country. Not since the war." "This ain't your business, Cowboy," Vernon snarled, taking a step forward. "You're new around here, so maybe you don't understand how things work in Julian. That girl belongs to the Velvet Rose until she works off her debt." "Debt slavery's still slavery," Isaiah replied evenly. "And I understand just fine how things ought to work in America." Abigail trembled behind Isaiah's protective frame, scarcely daring to hope this stranger might truly help her. She could feel the tension radiating between the two men, knew how dangerous Vernon could be when crossed. Vernon's hand inched toward the gun on his hip. "Last chance to mind your own affairs, Thompson. You want company tonight? Madam's got plenty of other girls." In one fluid motion, Isaiah drew his revolver and leveled it at Vernon's chest. "My affairs are my own to decide," he said quietly. "And I've decided this stops now. Turn around and walk away, Pike." The two men locked eyes in the pale moonlight, the silence stretching between them like a drawn bowstring. Abigail held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain both men could hear it. Finally, Vernon spat in the dirt. "You've made a mistake tonight, Thompson. Madam's got friends in this town, powerful friends." His eyes shifted to Abigail. "And you, girl, this ain't over, not by a long shot." With that ominous promise hanging in the air, Vernon backed away slowly, his hateful gaze never leaving them until he disappeared around the corner. Only when Vernon was well out of sight did Isaiah holster his weapon and turn to face her. In the silver moonlight, Abigail could see him clearly for the first time, strong, weathered features, dark hair beneath his hat, and eyes that held both kindness and caution. "You're shaking," he observed quietly, shrugging off his long duster coat. With gentle movements that belied his size, he wrapped it around her shoulders. The coat was warm from his body, smelling of leather, horses, and the open plains. "He won't come back tonight, not with witnesses around, but he won't forget either." Abigail clutched the edges of the coat around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the night had become, or perhaps it was just the adrenaline leaving her body. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But you shouldn't have. You don't know what they're capable of." "I've got a fair idea," Isaiah replied, his gaze sweeping the street cautiously. "Pike's reputation precedes him, even in Tucson." "You're not from Julian," Isaiah shook his head. "Just passing through, got a job moving cattle to the Northern Territories." He studied her face, his expression softening. "You were running. You have somewhere safe to go." The question brought fresh tears to Abigail's eyes. She shook her head, the magnitude of her situation crashing over her. "I saved enough for a stagecoach ticket, but it doesn't leave until morning. I don't know where to go until then." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I've got a room at the boarding house on the edge of town. Mrs. Walsh runs it, strict as they come, respectable widow. You can take the bed. I'll sleep in the chair until morning." Abigail stared at him, suspicious despite his help. Men didn't offer things without expecting something in return. That was the first harsh lesson Julian had taught her. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." A sad smile touched his lips. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be trapped, Miss Turner," she supplied cautiously. "Abigail Turner." "Isaiah Thompson," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "And I promise you this, Miss Turner, you'll be free come morning. You have my word." There was something in his steady gaze that made her want to believe him, even as years of hard-learned caution screamed warnings in her mind. But what choice did she have? Vernon would be back, perhaps with reinforcements. The night was cold, and she had nowhere else to go. "All right, Mr. Thompson," she said finally. "I accept your help, but please understand I won't. You needn't worry on that account," he interrupted gently, understanding her unspoken fear. "My mother raised me better than that." Relief washed through her, though wariness remained. "Thank you." Isaiah offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Let's go then. Dawn's still hours away, and Pike might not wait that long to try again." Together they moved through the sleeping town, Abigail wrapped in Isaiah's oversized coat, her small bundle clutched protectively to her chest. Each shadow made her flinch, each distant sound caused her to startle. Isaiah seemed to sense her fear, keeping a respectful distance while remaining close enough to protect her if needed. "How long were you there? At Madame Lucille's?" he asked quietly as they walked. Abigail stared at the ground, shame coloring her cheeks despite the darkness. 3 years. I came west to be a schoolteacher. There was correspondence about a position in Tucson. When I arrived, I discovered the letters were false Madame's way of luring young women from back east. And then she claimed you owed her for your travel expenses," Isaiah guessed, his voice tight with anger. Abigail nodded. "The debt only grew. Room and board, clothes, doctor visits when customers got rough." She trailed off, unable to continue. Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more as they approached a modest 2-story building set slightly apart from the main street. A neatly painted sign reading "Walsh Boarding House" hung beside the door. "Wait here," Isaiah instructed, guiding her to a small bench beneath a gnarled mesquite tree. "Mrs. Walsh has strict rules about visitors, especially after dark. Let me speak with her first." Abigail sat nervously, clutching his coat around her shoulders as Isaiah disappeared inside. The night had grown colder, or perhaps it was just her fear making her shiver. Every shadow seemed to hold Vernon Pike's menacing form, every rustle of wind his threatening whisper. Minutes stretched like hours before the door opened again. Isaiah emerged with a stern-faced older woman wrapped in a faded dressing gown, her gray hair tucked beneath a sleeping cap. "So this is the young lady," Mrs. Walsh said, assessing Abigail with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Isaiah's explained your situation, child." Abigail stood shakily, suddenly intensely aware of her disheveled appearance. "I'm sorry for the disturbance, madam. I wouldn't impose if—" Mrs. Walsh waved away her apologies with a surprisingly gentle expression. "No need for that. I know what goes on at the Velvet Rose. Not the first girl to escape that place, though most don't make it this far." She glanced at Isaiah with newfound respect. "Come inside before you catch your death. I've put fresh linens on the bed in the spare room." Relief flooded through Abigail as she followed Mrs. Walsh into the warm interior of the boarding house. The older woman led her upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, washstand, and chair. "Bathrooms down the hall," Mrs. Walsh explained briskly. "I'll bring you some hot water and a nightgown. You look about my daughter's size. She's in Prescott now, married to a banker." Her expression softened. "Don't you worry about Madame Lucille tonight. This house has stood against worse than her, and I keep a shotgun under my bed." With that reassurance, she departed, leaving Abigail alone with Isaiah once more. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, respectfully not entering the room. "Thank you," Abigail said, removing his coat and holding it out to him. "For everything." Isaiah took the coat, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. "Get some rest, Miss Turner. I'll be down the hall if you need anything, and Mrs. Walsh is just downstairs." "The stage coach leaves at 7, she said, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the night's events crashing over her. "I should be on it." A shadow crossed Isaiah's face. "About that, Mrs. Walsh mentioned that Madame Lucille has an arrangement with the stagecoach company. They alert her when young women try to leave town alone." Abigail's heart sank. "Then I'm trapped here after all." "No," Isaiah said firmly. "You're not. I'm heading north tomorrow with a small herd. It's not as fast as the stage, but it's safer. If you're willing to travel rough for a few days, I can take you as far as Prescott. Mrs. Walsh says her daughter might help you there." "Why are you doing this?" Abigail asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "You don't know me. I could be—" "What? A thief, a liar." Isaiah's smile was sad. "We all have pasts, Miss Turner, some more difficult than others. But where I come from, you help folks when they need it, no questions asked." He touched the brim of his hat in a gentle gesture. "Rest now. We'll talk more in the morning." As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him softly, "Mr. Thompson." He paused, looking back. "I was neither of those things before the Velvet Rose," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't want to be them now." His expression softened. "I believe you, Miss Turner. Good night." As the door closed behind him, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the night washing over her in waves. For the first time in 3 years, she would sleep without fear of being awakened for a client's pleasure. For the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at her and seen a person worthy of respect. She touched her mother's locket through the thin fabric of her chemise. "I'm going to be all right, Mama," she whispered to the empty room. "I think I'm finally going to be free." Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the small window of Abigail's borrowed room. For a moment upon waking, panic seized her. Had she overslept? Would Madame Lucille be storming up the stairs with a leather strap? Before she remembered where she was, the boarding house. Safety, at least for now. A soft knock at the door startled her from these thoughts. "Miss Turner, it's Mrs. Walsh. I've brought some things for you." Abigail opened the door to find the boarding house proprietress bearing a tray of steaming porridge and a small stack of folded clothing. "Eat while it's hot," Mrs. Walsh instructed, setting the tray on the small table. "And these might fit you better than what you've got. My Sarah left them behind when she married. Nothing fancy, mind you, but clean and whole." Abigail's fingers trembled as she touched the simple cotton dresses and undergarments. "Mrs. Walsh, I can't accept—" "Nonsense," the older woman interrupted briskly. "They're gathering dust otherwise. Besides, you can't travel with Isaiah looking like you've just stepped out of that place." Her expression softened slightly. "The men around these parts, they see a certain kind of dress, they make assumptions. Best to look respectable if you're aiming to start fresh." Gratitude welled in Abigail's chest. "Thank you, I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Live a good life," Mrs. Walsh replied simply. "That's payment enough for me. Now eat up. Isaiah's already seeing to the horses and you'll want to be away before the town fully wakes." After Mrs. Walsh left, Abigail ate quickly, savoring the simple porridge as if it were the finest meal she'd ever tasted. Then she washed with the lukewarm water in the basin and slipped into one of the borrowed dresses, a modest brown calico with tiny yellow flowers at the collar and cuffs. It was slightly loose on her thin frame, but with the matching belt cinched tight, it fit well enough. She brushed out her long auburn hair, wincing as the comb caught on tangles. For years at the Velvet Rose, Madame Lucille had insisted she wear it in elaborate styles, often with gaudy ornaments that appealed to the clientele. Today, she simply braided it into a single plait down her back, the way her mother had worn hers. When she descended the stairs, she found Isaiah waiting in the small parlor, his hat in his hands. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch surprise, certainly, but something else too. Something warm and appreciative that had nothing to do with the leering look she was accustomed to from men. "Miss Turner," he said, standing, "you look well rested." A small smile touched her lips at his careful choice of words. "Much better than last night, I imagine." "I've packed some provisions," Mrs. Walsh announced, entering with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "Biscuits, jerky, dried apples. Should last a couple days if you're careful." Isaiah accepted the bundle with thanks, then turned to Abigail. "If you're ready, we should go. I've settled with Mrs. Walsh for the room and board." "But I can pay," Abigail began, reaching for the pouch of coins hidden in her dress pocket. "Keep your money," Isaiah said firmly. "You'll need it more than I will." Outside, the early morning sunlight bathed Julian's main street in a deceptively peaceful glow. Two horses waited, tethered to the hitching post. Isaiah's sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. "Borrowed the mare from the livery," Isaiah explained, noting her questioning look. "Owner owed me a favor." He busied himself securing their small bundles to the saddles. "You ride much?" Abigail approached the mare cautiously, stroking its velvety nose. "Not since I was a girl in Massachusetts. My father kept horses." Isaiah nodded. "Daisy here is gentle as they come. We'll take it slow at first." Mrs. Walsh appeared at the door, a shotgun cradled in her arms. "You best be off." "Saw one of Madame's men skulking about the mercantile already." Isaiah's expression hardened. "Yes, madam." He turned to Abigail, offering his cupped hands. "Here, let me help you up." With his assistance, she settled awkwardly into the saddle, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. The height was dizzying after so long on the ground, but the mare stood patiently, seeming to sense her rider's nervousness. "Keep your heels down and hold the reins like this," Isaiah demonstrated with his own horse's reins. "Don't pull too hard on her mouth, she knows what to do." Abigail nodded, concentrating on following his instructions. The leather of the saddle creaked beneath her as she shifted, finding her balance. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Walsh," she called softly to the older woman. Mrs. Walsh nodded, her weathered face stern but kind. God go with you both. And Isaiah, her grip tightened on the shotgun, you take care of her. Yes, madam, he replied solemnly, swinging easily into his own saddle. That I will. They set off at a walk, Isaiah leading the way through the back streets of Julian rather than down the main thoroughfare. The town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, a milk wagon making early deliveries, miners trudging toward the nearby silver diggings. We'll meet up with my men and the cattle about 5 miles north, Isaiah explained as they reached the outskirts of town. Small herd, just 40 head, moving up to a ranch near Prescott. My foreman Hank knows I had business in town, so he'll be expecting me. You. He hesitated, glancing at her. They'll wonder why you're bringing a woman, Abigail finished for him, understanding his dilemma. What will you tell them? Isaiah considered this as they passed the last scattered buildings of Julian. The truth part of it, anyway, that you needed safe passage north and I offered it. His expression hardened. Hank and the boys are good men. They won't ask more questions than that. They rode in silence for a while, Abigail gradually growing more comfortable in the saddle, though her muscles protested the unfamiliar activity. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with scrub, brush, and cacti, the distant mountains a hazy purple against the brightening sky. Can I ask you something, Mr. Thompson? Abigail ventured after they put some distance between themselves and Julian. Isaiah, he corrected gently. And yes, you can ask me anything. Isaiah, she tried, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. How did you know Vernon Pike? Last night he called you by name. Isaiah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Crossed paths with him in Tucson a few months back. There was a young man, barely more than a boy really, in a card game at the saloon. Pike accused him of cheating, was about to put a bullet in him. He shrugged, as if what he'd done was of little consequence. I stepped in, suggested maybe the boy just had beginner's luck. And Pike backed down. Abigail found this hard to believe, knowing Vernon's volatile temper. A ghost of a smile touched Isaiah's lips. Let's just say I was more persuasive then than I was last night. He glanced at her. Pike's the kind who preys on those weaker than himself. Stand up to him with enough conviction, he usually finds easier targets. Abigail shuddered, remembering all too well how Vernon treated the girls at the Velvet Rose, especially the new ones. He's a monster, she said quietly. Yes, Isaiah agreed simply. He is. They crested a small rise, and Abigail could see dust in the distance, the cattle drive, she presumed. Isaiah confirmed this with a nod. That's them up ahead. When we reach the others, stay close to me at first. Trail drives aren't always the most welcoming places for ladies, though my men know better than to be disrespectful. Abigail's anxiety spiked at the thought of facing more strange men, of being judged and possibly recognized for what she had been. Will they know? About me, I mean. About where I came from. Isaiah turned in his saddle to face her fully, his expression earnest. Miss Turner, Abigail, what you were forced to do in Julian doesn't define who you are, not to me and not to anyone who matters. He held her gaze steadily. As far as my men need to know, you're a respectable lady who needs safe passage north. Nothing more, nothing less. His words washed over her like a blessing, a benediction absolving her of shame she'd carried for 3 long years. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them away hurriedly. Thank you, she whispered. Isaiah's smile was gentle. No thanks needed for simple human decency. He turned back toward the trail. Come on. Let's introduce you to the boys and get this journey properly started. As they rode toward the distant cattle drive, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope, fragile but growing, like the first green shoot after a long winter. Whatever lay ahead would be difficult. She had no illusions about that. But for the first time since she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Tucson 3 years ago, she dared to believe that something better might be possible. And riding beside her, steady and strong as an oak, was the man who'd made that hope possible, the cowboy who'd wrapped her in his coat and promised freedom. The cattle drive moved steadily northward across the Arizona territory, a dusty, plodding procession that settled into its own peculiar rhythm. For Abigail, those first days were a blur of new experiences, sleeping under the vast, star-studded sky, eating beans and biscuits cooked over an open fire, learning to ride for hours without complaining of the aches in her legs and back. Isaiah's crew consisted of 4 other men. Hank Dawson, the grizzled foreman with a silver-streaked beard and surprisingly gentle manner; the Rodriguez brothers, Miguel and Carlos, expert horsemen from a ranching family near the Mexican border; and young Billy Whitaker, barely 20 and eager to prove himself on his first cattle drive. True to Isaiah's word, none of the men questioned Abigail's presence beyond initial introductions, though she occasionally caught curious glances when they thought she wasn't looking. She kept to herself during the day's ride, usually staying near the chuck wagon where Hank doubled as cook, helping with whatever tasks she could manage. On the 3rd evening, as they made camp near a small creek, Abigail sat by the fire mending a tear in one of the dresses Mrs. Walsh had given her. The men were occupied with the cattle and horses, giving her a rare moment of solitude. "You're good with a needle." Abigail looked up to find Isaiah watching her, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunset. She hadn't heard him approach, yet somehow his presence didn't startle her as most men's did. "My mother taught me," she replied, setting her work aside. "Before she died, she made sure I knew how to run a household properly, cooking, sewing, managing accounts." Isaiah settled on a nearby log, his movements careful, as if he was consciously trying not to frighten her with sudden gestures. "You mentioned you came west to be a school teacher. You have education as well, then?" Abigail nodded, surprising herself with how easily the words came now. "My father was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. He believed girls should be educated same as boys." A sad smile touched her lips. "He didn't live to see me graduate, though. Influenza took both my parents within a month of each other when I was 18. "I'm sorry," Isaiah said quietly. "Losing family is never easy." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "You speak from experience." He nodded, staring into the flickering flames. "Lost my parents too, though differently. My father was killed at Antietam. I was 14. My mother struggled on for years afterward, keeping our small farm going, but her heart was never the same. She passed 5 years ago." "The war took so many," Abigail murmured, thinking of the hollow-eyed veterans she sometimes saw in town, men whose bodies had survived but whose spirits seemed forever damaged. "Too many," Isaiah agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "After Mother died, I sold the farm. Couldn't bear to stay in that place with all its memories. Drifted west, worked ranches in Texas, New Mexico, finally Arizona. Found I had a knack with cattle and horses." He smiled faintly. "And here I am." "Here you are," Abigail echoed softly, "rescuing damsels in distress from brothels." His laugh was unexpected and warm. "Hardly a regular occurrence, I assure you." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loss and loneliness. In that moment, Abigail saw past the strong, capable cowboy to the man beneath, one who understood suffering but hadn't been broken by it. The moment was interrupted by Billy approaching with an armful of firewood. "Boss, Hank says to tell you we're running low on coffee. Might need to make a detour to that trading post near Apache Springs if we want any before Prescott." Isaiah nodded, rising to his feet, Tell him we'll discuss it over supper." As Billy departed, he turned back to Abigail. "Speaking of which, I should see to my horse before we eat. Excuse me." Abigail watched him walk away, his tall figure merging with the gathering twilight. Something warm unfurled in her chest, not quite trust, not yet, but its tentative beginning. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider that not all men were like Vernon Pike or the customers at the Velvet Rose. Some, perhaps, were like Isaiah Thompson. The next morning brought clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain before nightfall. Isaiah conferred with Hank over breakfast, both men eyeing the darkening sky with concern. "Storm's coming faster than I thought," Hank muttered, scratching his bearded chin. "Might be wiser to make for Apache Springs now rather than pushing north. Trading post there has a barn big enough for some of the stock, and old man Wilson always has rooms to let above his store." "How far?" Isaiah asked, sipping the last of their dwindling coffee. 5, maybe 6 hours if we push steady," Hank replied. "Better than being caught in open country with lightning striking." Isaiah nodded, his gaze finding Abigail across the camp where she was helping Carlos wash the breakfast dishes. "Agreed. Let's break camp and head east. I'll tell the men." Within the hour, they were moving, the cattle lowing restlessly as they sensed the changing weather. Abigail rode near the chuck wagon as usual, but as the morning progressed, Isaiah fell back from his position at the front of the herd to ride beside her. "Storm's getting closer," he observed, glancing at the heavy clouds now dominating the western sky. "How are you holding up?" Abigail shifted in her saddle, trying to ignore the ache in her lower back. "I'm fine," she assured him, though in truth, the idea of riding through a thunderstorm terrified her. She'd never been comfortable with lightning, even as a child safely tucked in her bedroom. Isaiah studied her face, clearly not believing her brave front. "It's all right to be afraid, you know. Storms out here are nothing to take lightly." "I just don't want to slow everyone down," she admitted. "You've all been kind enough to let me travel with you. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Isaiah said firmly, "and we're changing course anyway. There's a trading post at Apache Springs. We'll shelter there until the weather passes." Relief flooded through her, though she tried not to show it too plainly. "Thank you." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic creaking of saddle leather. Abigail found herself studying Isaiah's profile when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the wind ruffled his dark hair beneath his hat, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, or had once. "What will you do?" "After Prescott, I mean," Isaiah asked suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. Abigail blinked, startled by the question and embarrassed at being caught staring. I hadn't thought that far ahead," she confessed. "Just getting away from Julian seemed like enough of a miracle." Isaiah nodded in understanding. "Mrs. Walsh seemed confident her daughter could help you find work there. Teaching, perhaps." "Perhaps," Abigail agreed, though the thought brought a flicker of unease. "Though I wonder if anyone would hire me once they knew my history." "They don't need to know," Isaiah said quietly. "The past is past. Everyone deserves a fresh start." His words warmed her, even as a cooler breeze signaled the approaching storm. "What about you? After you deliver the cattle, where will you go?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hadn't thought that far ahead either. There's usually work for a man who knows cattle. Winter's coming, though, so I might stay on at the Bar K. That's the ranch near Prescott where we're delivering this herd." "I see." Abigail wasn't sure why this information made her heart sink slightly. Of course he would continue his life after delivering her safely to Prescott. What had she expected? The first fat raindrops began to fall as they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below, nestled against the base of red rock cliffs, stood a cluster of buildings, the trading post at Apache Springs. "There it is," Isaiah pointed. "We'll make it before the worst hits." The wind picked up as they descended toward the settlement, driving the rain sideways in increasingly heavy sheets. By the time they reached the trading post, Abigail was thoroughly soaked, despite the oilskin slicker Isaiah had insisted she wear over her dress. The trading post was larger than she'd expected, a main store with attached warehouse, a separate barn, and a small bunkhouse for travelers. A weathered sign reading "Wilson's Trading Post and General Store" creaked in the wind above the covered porch. An elderly man with a shock of white hair emerged as they approached, waving them in from the storm. "Hurry up before you all drown," he called cheerfully. "Got the barn ready for your stock, Thompson. Saw you coming from up the ridge." Isaiah dismounted quickly, then helped Abigail down from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet hit the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. "Easy," Isaiah murmured, his strong hand steadying her elbows. "You're all right." The warmth of his touch penetrated even through the wet slicker, sending an unexpected flutter through her stomach. Abigail pulled away gently, self-conscious under the curious gaze of the trading post owner. "Jebediah Wilson," the old man introduced himself, extending a gnarled hand first to Isaiah, then more gently to Abigail. "Welcome to Apache Springs, madam." "Abigail Turner," she replied, taking his weathered hand briefly. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Any friend of Thompson's is welcome here," Wilson assured her, ushering them toward the store as the men began moving the cattle toward the large barn behind the trading post. Come in. Martha's got stew on and coffee brewing." The interior of the trading post was a welcome haven from the storm, warm and dry with the comforting sense of wood smoke, coffee, and cooking food. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to ammunition. A pot-bellied stove dominated one corner, radiating welcome heat, while a counter with a brass cash register marked the domain of the proprietor. "Martha," Wilson called toward a doorway behind the counter. "We've got guests. Bring some towels, would you?" A plump woman with kind eyes and graying auburn hair appeared, carrying a stack of clean towels. "Land's sakes, you're soaked through," she clucked, handing towels to Abigail and Isaiah. "Come near the fire before you catch your death." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Abigail said gratefully, blotting her dripping hair with the rough towel. "Martha, please," the woman insisted. "Mrs. Wilson was my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, and one Mrs. Wilson in a household is quite enough." Her keen eyes took in Abigail's damp dress and shivering form. "You'll need dry clothes before you do anything else. Come with me, dear. I think I have something that might fit you." Abigail glanced uncertainly at Isaiah, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on. I'll see to the men and horses, then be back for supper." Martha led Abigail through the door behind the counter and up a narrow staircase to the living quarters above the store. The space was surprisingly cozy, a small sitting room with well-worn furniture, a dining area, and several doors leading to what Abigail presumed were bedrooms. "In here, dear," Martha directed, opening one of the doors to reveal a simply furnished bedroom. She bustled to a chest of drawers and began rummaging through its contents. "My daughter Rebecca left some things when she married and moved to California. She was about your size, I think." She produced a sage green dress of sturdy cotton, slightly faded but clean and well mended. "This should do for now. There's a washroom at the end of the hall where you can change. Just leave your wet things and I'll see to drying them by the fire." "You're very kind," Abigail said, touched by the woman's matter-of-fact generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." Martha patted her hand. "No thanks needed. We don't get many visitors out this way, especially not young ladies. It's nice to have female company for a change." She smiled warmly. "Now go get changed before you catch a chill. Supper will be ready soon, and you look like you could use a hot meal." The washroom was small but clean, with a copper tub, washstand, and mirror. Abigail peeled off her wet clothes, shivering as the cool air hit her damp skin. The borrowed dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose around the waist. She combed through her tangled hair as best she could with her fingers, then braided it loosely over one shoulder. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The frightened, hollow-eyed girl from the Velvet Rose was gone, replaced by a woman with sunburned cheeks and a steadier gaze. Still thin, still bearing the invisible scars of her time in Julian, but somehow different, stronger perhaps. When she descended to the main room of the trading post, she found Isaiah and the other men already there, their wet outer clothes hanging near the stove to dry. Isaiah stood as she entered, something in his expression making her cheeks warm. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You look much drier," she finished for him with a small smile. "Thanks to Mrs. Wilson's kindness." Martha bustled in from what must have been the kitchen, carrying a large pot of fragrant stew. Just in time, everyone to the table. Storm set in for the night by the look of it, so we might as well enjoy a proper meal. Dinner was a lively affair, with Wilson regaling them with tales of the trading post's early days, when Apache raids were common, and every traveler brought news from distant parts. Martha kept everyone's plates full, insisting Abigail take seconds and then thirds, declaring she was thin as a rail and needed feeding up. Throughout the meal, Abigail was acutely aware of Isaiah seated beside her, his presence both reassuring and unsettling in a way she couldn't quite define. Their arms occasionally brushed as they reached for bread or passed dishes, each brief contact sending a curious warmth through her. After the meal, the men gathered around the stove with Wilson, discussing routes and weather, while Martha insisted Abigail help her with the dishes. "Not because I need the help, mind you, but because I'm starved for conversation that doesn't involve cattle prices or the quality of this year's grain harvest." In the kitchen, as they washed and dried the supper dishes, Martha's conversation turned more personal. "So, how long have you known Mr. Thompson?" Abigail hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Not very long, actually. He's helping me get to Prescott." Martha nodded, her expression revealing nothing. "He seems a good sort, polite, respectful, not like some cowboys who pass through." "Yes," Abigail agreed softly. "He's been very kind." Martha handed her another plate to dry, studying her face with motherly concern. "You're running from something, aren't you, dear?" Abigail nearly dropped the plate. No need to explain," Martha interrupted gently. "I recognize that look. Had it myself once long ago before I met Jebediah." She patted Abigail's hand. "Just remember whatever's behind you. It doesn't have to define what's ahead." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes at the unexpected understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now," Martha said briskly, clearly sensing Abigail's emotion and tactfully changing the subject. "Let me show you where you'll be sleeping tonight. We've got 2 spare rooms. You'll have the one at the end of the hall, nice and private. The men will use the bunkhouse out back, except for Mr. Wilson and Mr. Thompson. Jeb insists the trail boss deserves a proper bed, so Isaiah will take the room next to yours." The storm continued through the night, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the sky. Abigail lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the tempest outside and the occasional creaking of the building's timbers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Isaiah, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. She'd spent 3 years avoiding any emotional connection to men, viewing them only as customers to be endured or threats to be feared. Yet here she was, lying awake thinking about a man she'd known less than a week. It was foolish, she told herself sternly. Isaiah had rescued her and offered safe passage to Prescott because he was a decent man who couldn't stand by and watch an injustice. Nothing more. Once they reached their destination, he would continue his life, and she would begin hers anew. A particularly loud crash of thunder made her flinch. As a child, she'd crawled into her parents' bed during storms, finding comfort in her father's steady voice explaining the science behind lightning and thunder, her mother's gentle hand stroking her hair until she fell asleep. Now she was alone, far from everything familiar, her future uncertain. The realization brought a wave of loneliness so acute it nearly took her breath away. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Abigail," Isaiah's voice barely audible above the storm. "Are you all right?" She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "Yes," she called back. "Just—" The thunder. There was a pause then. "May I come in?" Just for a moment, propriety demanded she refuse. A respectable woman didn't admit a man to her bedroom, especially not at night. But she wasn't a respectable woman anymore, was she? That had been taken from her long ago at the Velvet Rose. "Yes," she said finally. The door opened slowly, revealing Isaiah in shirt sleeves and trousers, his hair slightly rumpled. He remained in the doorway, making no move to enter further without invitation. "I heard you moving about," he explained. "Thought the storm might be keeping you awake." "It is," she admitted, gesturing for him to enter. "I've never liked thunderstorms, even as a child." Isaiah stepped inside but stayed near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "My mother was the same way. Used to say it was like God was rearranging his furniture upstairs." The image made Abigail smile despite her anxiety. Another peal of thunder rattled the windows and she flinched involuntarily. "It will pass by morning," Isaiah assured her, his voice gentle. "Storms always do." Something in his tone made her think he wasn't just talking about the weather. Their eyes met in the dim light from the single candle on her nightstand, and Abigail felt that same curious warmth spread through her chest. "Isaiah," she said softly, his name still new on her tongue. "Why did you help me?" Truly, he was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "Because it was right," he said finally. "Because every person deserves to choose their own path." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And because when I looked in your eyes that night, I saw someone worth saving." "And what do you see now?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Isaiah's gaze was steady, his expression earnest in the flickering candlelight. "I see someone brave, someone who's survived things that would break many, someone finding her way back to herself." Tears filled Abigail's eyes at his words, at the simple dignity he offered her after years of degradation. "Thank you," she whispered. Thunder crashed again, closer this time, and Abigail jumped despite herself. "Would you like me to stay until the storm passes?" Isaiah asked. "Just to talk," he added quickly. "I could tell you about the time my horse Lightning got spooked by a jackrabbit and dumped me in a cactus patch. Hank still tells that story around every campfire." His offer, so respectful and understanding of her fears both of the storm and of men, touched something deep inside her. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." Isaiah settled into the room's single chair, keeping a proper distance from the bed. "Well, it was about 2 years ago, just outside Tucson," he began, his deep voice a soothing counterpoint to the raging storm. Lightning was a fine horse in many ways, but he had one terrible flaw: he was afraid of the smallest creatures. As Isaiah's story unfolded, punctuated with self-deprecating humor and vivid descriptions, Abigail felt her tension gradually ease. His presence was comforting rather than threatening, his voice a steady anchor against the storm's fury. Perhaps, she thought as her eyelids grew heavy, not all storms were to be feared. Some brought much-needed rain to parched earth. Some cleared the air and washed everything clean. And some, just maybe, brought unexpected blessings in their wake. With that thought, she drifted into sleep, Isaiah's gentle voice following her into dreams untouched by fear for the first time in years. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, and the fresh, clean scent of rain washed earth. Abigail woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering the trading post, the storm, Isaiah's late-night visit. The chair beside her bed was empty, though the impression of his presence somehow lingered. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry and pressed thanks to Martha's care, and made her way downstairs. The trading post was already bustling with activity. Wilson behind the counter helping a weathered-looking miner with supplies, Martha arranging fresh baked goods on a small table near the stove. "Good morning, dear," Martha called cheerfully. "Sleep well. Storm was quite something, wasn't it?" "It was," Abigail agreed, not mentioning Isaiah's visit. Some moments felt too private to share, even with someone as kind as Martha Wilson. "Is there anything I can help with?" "You can help yourself to breakfast," Martha insisted, guiding her to the table where coffee, biscuits, and preserves awaited. "The men have already eaten and gone to see to the cattle. That nice Mr. Thompson said to tell you they'll be ready to move out in about an hour, if that suits you." Abigail's heart gave an odd little leap at the mention of Isaiah. "Yes, of course, that's fine." As she ate, Martha bustled about, gathering supplies. "I've packed some things for your journey," she explained, noticing Abigail's curious glance. "Just some biscuits, jerky, a jar of peach preserves." "The way to Prescott can be dusty business." "You've been too kind already," Abigail protested. Martha waved away her objections. "Nonsense. It does an old woman's heart good to fuss over someone. Our children are grown and gone. It's just Jeb and me rattling around this place now." After breakfast, Abigail helped Martha with the dishes, then gathered her few belongings. When she tried to pay for her room and board, both Martha and Wilson refused adamantly. "Your company was payment enough," Wilson insisted. "Gets lonely out here sometimes, especially for Martha." Having a young woman to talk with was better than gold to her. "At least let me pay for the supplies," Abigail persisted. Martha pressed a small package into her hands instead. "Take this instead. It's not much, just some fabric and thread, a bit of ribbon. Thought you might want to make yourself something new when you reach Prescott." Touched beyond words, Abigail embraced the older woman. "Thank you for everything." Outside, the men were preparing to depart, loading the chuck wagon and saddling horses. Isaiah stood by Daisy, adjusting the mare's saddle. He looked up as Abigail approached, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Ready to continue our journey?" "Yes," Abigail replied, surprised to find she meant it. Despite the uncertainty awaiting her in Prescott, the prospect of continued travel with Isaiah and his men no longer frightened her. "Thank you for last night," she added quietly. "For staying until I fell asleep." A faint color touched his cheeks. "It was nothing," he said, though his eyes told her it had been something indeed. He helped her mount Daisy, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Weather's cleared up nicely. Should make good time today." The next 4 days passed in a pleasant rhythm as they made their way northward. The landscape gradually changed from desert scrub to pine-dotted highlands as they gained elevation. Abigail found herself enjoying the journey more than she'd thought possible. The vast open spaces, the changing colors of the land, the camaraderie that developed among their small group. In the evenings around the campfire, she began to join the conversations rather than sitting silently apart. Hank taught her to make proper trail coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe, while young Billy shyly offered to show her how to play a simple tune on his harmonica. The Rodriguez brothers shared stories of their childhood in Sonora, making her laugh with tales of their youthful misadventures. And Isaiah was always there, a steady presence beside her, not hovering or controlling but available whenever she sought him out. Their conversations gradually deepened, moving from polite exchanges to genuine sharing. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own ranch. She confided her love of books and learning, how she'd once imagined teaching children to read and write. On the 6th night, as they camped within a day's ride of Prescott, Abigail found herself standing apart from the others, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The thought of reaching their destination tomorrow filled her with conflicting emotions: relief at achieving safety, certainly, but also an unexpected sadness at the thought of saying goodbye to Isaiah and the others. "Beautiful night," Isaiah's voice came quietly from behind her. She turned to find him standing a few paces away, his tall figure silhouetted against the glow of the distant campfire. "It is," she agreed, turning back to the stars. "I never saw stars like this in Massachusetts, or in Julian for that matter." "Too many buildings, too many lights," Isaiah said, moving to stand beside her. "Out here, there's nothing between you and the heavens." They stood in companionable silence for a while, both looking upward at the glittering expanse above. "We'll reach Prescott by mid-afternoon tomorrow," Isaiah said finally. "Mrs. Walsh gave me directions to her daughter's house. Her husband works at the bank on Montezuma Street, apparently quite respected in town." "That's good," Abigail replied, though her heart wasn't in the words. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would have to find her way among strangers again. "Abigail," Isaiah's voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confident tone. "There's something I've been wanting to say." She turned to face him, her pulse quickening at his serious expression. "Yes." Isaiah ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "These past days traveling together, I've come to care for you, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." His eyes met hers, earnest in the starlight. "I know you're just beginning to find your way after what happened in Julian. I know trust doesn't come easily for you with good reason, but I wanted you to know," he paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I'd like to continue knowing you after Prescott, if you're willing." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "Continue knowing me, call on you properly," Isaiah clarified. "I'll be staying at the Bar K at least through winter, which isn't far from town. I could visit if you'd permit it." He hesitated again. "Unless you'd rather make a completely fresh start, with no reminders of Julian or the journey. I'd understand that too." Emotion welled in Abigail's chest: gratitude for his consideration, fear of the unknown future, and something else. Something warm and hopeful that had been growing steadily since the night he'd wrapped her in his coat and stood between her and Vernon Pike. "I think," she said carefully, "that not all reminders would be unwelcome." She took a deep breath, finding courage from somewhere deep inside. "I'd like very much if you called on me, Isaiah." The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip. "Then I will," he promised. "Once you're settled." They stood there beneath the vast canopy of stars, not touching but connected nonetheless by something fragile yet strong, the beginning of possibility, of trust cautiously extended and carefully received. When they finally returned to the campfire, Hank gave them a knowing look but said nothing. Billy played a sweet, gentle tune on his harmonica, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Abigail felt that perhaps there might be a place for her in this wild, beautiful land after all. The next day dawned clear and cool with a hint of autumn in the air. They broke camp early, eager to reach Prescott before nightfall. As they rode, the landscape continued to change, pinyon pines giving way to taller ponderosas, the terrain growing more rugged and elevated. By early afternoon, they crested a ridge, and there it was Prescott, nestled in a basin surrounded by mountains. From this distance, it looked surprisingly substantial for a frontier town, a proper courthouse with its distinctive cupola dominating the town square, sturdy buildings lining wide streets, church steeples rising against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. Territorial capital until a few years ago, Isaiah explained, noting Abigail's surprised expression. Still, one of the most important towns in Arizona. They made their way down into the valley, the cattle growing restless as they sensed the end of their journey. At a crossroads about a mile from town, Isaiah called a halt. "Hank, you and the boys take the herd on to the Bar K," he instructed. "I'll escort Miss Turner into town and join you by nightfall." Hank nodded, tipping his hat to Abigail. "Been a pleasure traveling with you, madam. Hope Prescott treats you well." The other men offered similar farewells, even shy Billy managing a "good luck, Miss Turner" before they moved on, driving the cattle toward the ranch that was to be their final destination. Alone now with Isaiah, Abigail felt suddenly nervous as they rode toward Prescott. Her future, which had seemed an abstract concept during their journey, was now imminent and alarmingly real. "Having second thoughts?" Isaiah asked gently, reading her expression. "Just uncertain," she admitted. "I've been running away from Julian. Now I need to start running towards something, and I'm not sure what that is yet." Isaiah nodded in understanding. "One step at a time," he advised. "First, let's find Mrs. Walsh's daughter and get you settled. Everything else will follow." The streets of Prescott were bustling with activity as they rode in, merchants hawking wares, women shopping, children playing, miners and cowboys going about their business. After the isolation of the trail, the town seemed almost overwhelming to Abigail, though it was nothing compared to Boston or even Julian in size. They located the bank on Montezuma Street, without difficulty, a handsome brick building with polished windows, and a sign proclaiming First National Bank of Prescott in gold lettering. Inside, a clerk directed them to Harold Winters, Mrs. Walsh's son-in-law, a portly, balding man with kind eyes and a ready smile. "My mother-in-law's letter arrived yesterday," he explained after Isaiah had introduced them. "Sarah's been preparing the guest room all morning. She's eager to meet you, Miss Turner." Relief washed over Abigail at this welcome. The Winters home proved to be a comfortable two-story house on a quiet street lined with cottonwood trees. Sarah Winters, a pretty woman in her early 30s with her mother's auburn hair and warm manner, greeted them at the door with genuine enthusiasm. "Mother's letter spoke so highly of you," she gushed, ushering them into a well-appointed parlor. "Any friend of hers is welcome in our home for as long as needed." Over tea and freshly baked scones, Isaiah explained their journey from Julian, carefully editing the circumstances of Abigail's departure. For all Sarah knew, Abigail was simply a young woman seeking new opportunities after some unspecified difficulty. "Well, you're safe now," Sarah declared, patting Abigail's hand. And as it happens, we may have an opportunity for you already. The assistant at the town's small school is leaving to be married next month. They'll need someone with education and refinement to take her place." Abigail's heart leaped at this news. "Teaching. Truly," Sarah nodded, smiling at her excitement. "I serve on the school board. I'd be happy to introduce you to Headmaster Collins tomorrow. With proper references, which I'm sure Mother can provide, it could be a perfect position for a new beginning." As the conversation continued, Abigail felt a curious mixture of joy and sadness. Everything was working out better than she could have hoped. Safe haven, potential employment in her chosen field, kind people willing to help. Yet Isaiah would be leaving soon for the Bar K Ranch, and despite his promise to call on her, she felt the impending separation keenly. When it came time for him to go, Sarah tactfully excused herself, giving them a moment of privacy in the parlor. "It seems you'll be well looked after here," Isaiah said, his hat in his hands. "The Winters appear to be good people." "Yes," Abigail agreed softly. "Thanks to you, I would never have reached them without your help." Isaiah shook his head. "You would have found a way." "You're stronger than you know, Abigail Turner." His use of her full name sent a warm shiver through her. "When will I see you again?" she asked, then blushed at her own boldness. A smile touched his lips. "I need to get settled at the Bar K, make sure the cattle are properly delivered. But I could come to town on Sunday, perhaps, if that's not too soon." "Not too soon at all," she replied, her heart lifting. Isaiah hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "Until Sunday, then." The touch of his rough, calloused palm against her skin sent that now familiar warmth spreading through her chest. "Until Sunday," she echoed. He released her hand reluctantly and turned to go. At the door, he paused and looked back. "You're free now, Abigail," he said quietly. "Truly free to choose your own path. Remember that." With those words and a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Abigail standing in the Winters' parlor with the curious sensation that while one journey had ended, another was just beginning. The next days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Abigail settled into life in Prescott. Sarah Winters proved to be as kind and helpful as her mother, introducing Abigail to Headmaster Collins of the Prescott Academy for Boys and Girls, a dignified gentleman with silver hair and intelligent eyes. With Sarah's endorsement and a carefully crafted letter of reference from Mrs. Walsh, conveyed by telegraph, and stating that Abigail had worked as her companion and assistant for 3 years. Headmaster Collins offered Abigail the position of assistant teacher, to begin when the current assistant departed in 3 weeks' time. "Miss Turner, your background in classics and mathematics is exactly what we need," he declared after testing her knowledge. "Most of our young ladies study only the basics, but I believe in offering a more comprehensive education to those with the aptitude and interest. You will be a valuable addition to our staff." The salary was modest but sufficient for Abigail to eventually rent a small room of her own, though the Winters insisted she remain with them until she was fully established. Sarah took Abigail shopping for appropriate teaching clothes, and Harold arranged a small bank account for her first earnings. Through it all, Abigail marveled at the kindness of these near strangers and the rapid transformation of her circumstances. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been trapped at the Velvet Rose with no hope of escape. Now she was preparing to become a teacher, respected and independent. Yet despite these positive developments, she found her thoughts constantly returning to Isaiah. Would he truly call on Sunday as promised? And if he did, what then? Their connection had formed under extraordinary circumstances. Would it withstand the return to normal life? Sunday dawned clear and golden, the October air crisp with the promise of approaching winter. Abigail dressed with particular care in her best borrowed dress, a deep blue that Sarah insisted brought out her eyes, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style she remembered from her Boston days. "You look lovely," Sarah commented as they prepared for church. "Is it for anyone in particular?" Her eyes twinkled knowingly. Abigail blushed. "Mr. Thompson mentioned he might call today." "Did he indeed?" Sarah's smile widened. "Well, we shall be sure to welcome him properly." The Presbyterian church on Marina Street was crowded when they arrived, the congregation a mix of Prescott's established families and working folk. Abigail followed the Winters to their pew, aware of curious glances from those nearby. As Sarah had explained, newcomers were relatively rare and therefore objects of interest. Throughout the service, Abigail found her gaze drifting to the doors, wondering if Isaiah might attend. He hadn't mentioned church specifically, only calling on her afterward. The sermon seemed interminable, though the minister's words on new beginnings and God's grace touched something deep within her. As the congregation filed out after the final hymn, Sarah performed numerous introductions, presenting Abigail as our house guest from the East who will be joining the Academy's teaching staff. Abigail smiled and nodded, trying to remember names and faces while her heart raced with anticipation of seeing Isaiah. They were halfway home when Harold pointed ahead. "Isn't that your cowboy friend, my dear?" Abigail looked up to see Isaiah waiting beside the Winters' gate, looking uncommonly formal in a clean black coat, his hat in his hands. Her heart gave that curious leap again at the sight of him. "Mr. Thompson," Harold called genially as they approached. "Good to see you again. Will you join us for Sunday dinner?" "Thank you, sir, I'd be honored," Isaiah replied, his eyes finding Abigail's. "Miss Turner, you're looking well." "As are you, Mr. Thompson," she responded, hyper-aware of Sarah's interested gaze darting between them. Inside, Sarah bustled about setting an extra place while Harold engaged Isaiah in conversation about conditions at the Bar K. Abigail excused herself to help in the kitchen, needing a moment to compose herself. "He's quite handsome," Sarah observed as they prepared the meal. "And he looks at you as if you hang the moon." "Sarah," Abigail protested, her cheeks warming, "it's not like that. He helped me in a difficult situation, that's all." Sarah raised a skeptical eyebrow. "If you say so, dear." "But in my experience, men don't ride into town on their one day off just to check on someone they merely helped." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with conversation flowing easily among the four of them. Isaiah spoke of his work at the Bar K, the ranch owner's plans to expand, and his own hopes to someday have a place of his own. Harold discussed banking and town politics, while Sarah shared news of various community projects. Abigail remained relatively quiet, content to observe Isaiah in this new setting. He was different here, more polished than on the trail, yet still authentically himself. He handled the formal dinner with surprising grace for a cowboy, making her wonder again about his background before coming west. After the meal, Sarah suggested that Abigail show Isaiah the garden while she and Harold cleared the dishes. "It's quite lovely in the late afternoon light," she insisted with a meaningful glance at Abigail. The garden was indeed beautiful, with late-blooming roses and a small fountain that provided gentle background music to their conversation. They walked side by side along the gravel path, close but not touching. "You seem to be settling in well," Isaiah observed. "The teaching position sounds perfect for you." "It does," Abigail agreed. "Everyone has been so kind, so accepting. It's almost hard to believe." Isaiah nodded in understanding. New beginnings often feel that way, too good to be true. They reached a small bench beneath an apple tree and sat, a respectable distance between them. The afternoon sun dappled the ground through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. "Isaiah," Abigail began hesitantly, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Before you came west, what did you leave behind?" The question had been on her mind since their conversation at Apache Springs, when he'd mentioned selling his family farm. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Ghosts, mostly," he said finally. "After my father died at Antietam, my mother and I struggled to keep the farm going. There was a young woman in our town, Elizabeth Harrington. We'd grown up together and everyone assumed we'd marry someday." Something tightened in Abigail's chest. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did," Isaiah replied thoughtfully. "We were engaged briefly, but when my mother's health began to fail and the farm started losing money." He sighed. Elizabeth's father was the town banker. He made it clear she deserved better prospects than a failing farm and a mother who needed constant care. "She broke the engagement," Abigail guessed, a flicker of anger rising on his behalf. Isaiah nodded. "Can't entirely blame her. I wasn't much of a catch, overworked, worried about money, spending every spare moment caring for Mother." His smile was tinged with old sadness. "After Mother died, there was nothing to keep me there. Too many memories, too many pitying looks. So I sold everything, paid off our debts, and headed west with what little remained." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly, resisting the urge to take his hand. He turned to face her, his expression clearing. "Don't be. It was a long time ago, and if I hadn't left Indiana, I wouldn't be here now. Wouldn't have been in Julian that night." The significance of his words hung between them, unspoken but understood. If their respective pasts had been different, if his engagement hadn't ended, if she hadn't been lured to Arizona under false pretenses, they never would have met. "Sometimes," Abigail said carefully, "I think about what might have been if I'd never left Boston. If I'd married some banker's son, as my father hoped, settled into a respectable life there." She met his gaze steadily. "But then I wouldn't have met you either." Something shifted in Isaiah's expression, a softening, a deepening. Without words, he reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. The simple touch felt more intimate than anything Abigail had experienced at the Velvet Rose, where physical contact had been emptied of all meaning. "May I call on you again?" he asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Properly, with Sarah and Harold's permission. I can't come every Sunday, the ranch keeps me busy, but perhaps twice a month." Joy bubbled up in Abigail's chest. "I'd like that very much." They sat together in the dappled sunlight, hands joined, speaking of simple things, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. When it came time for Isaiah to leave, they walked slowly back to the house, reluctant for the afternoon to end. At the front gate, out of sight of the house windows, Isaiah paused. "Abigail," he said softly, her name a caress on his lips, "may I write to you between visits?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I'd like that too." He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made her heart race. "Until next time, then." Gently, with infinite care, he raised her hand to his lips and placed a whisper of a kiss across her knuckles. "Be well, Abigail Turner." As she watched him walk away, Abigail touched the spot on her hand where his lips had been, marveling at how such a chaste gesture could affect her so deeply. In all her time at the Velvet Rose, with all manner of physical intimacy forced upon her, she had never felt anything like the tender warmth now spreading through her entire being. Perhaps, she thought as she turned back toward the house, this was what real desire felt like, not the crude imitation she'd known in Julian, but something deeper, richer, built on respect and growing affection rather than power and money. It was a revelation, and one that both thrilled and terrified her. For if this was the beginning of love and she was starting to suspect it might be, then she had so much more to lose than she'd ever imagined possible. Autumn deepened into winter, bringing snow to the pine-covered mountains surrounding Prescott and frost to the town's early mornings. Abigail began her teaching position at the academy, finding unexpected joy in the eager faces of her students and the intellectual stimulation of preparing lessons. Isaiah's visits became the anchoring points of her weeks, sometimes Sunday afternoons at the winter's home, occasionally Saturday outings to town events when he could get away from the ranch for a full day. Between visits, his letters arrived regularly, full of stories about ranch life, thoughtful observations about books he was reading in the evenings, and increasingly, tender expressions of his growing feelings for her. In early December, after Abigail had been in Prescott for nearly 2 months, Isaiah arrived for his regular Sunday visit with an invitation. "The Bar K is hosting a Christmas gathering for the Hands and their families," he explained as they walked through the town square, bundled against the winter chill. "There'll be a proper dinner, music, dancing. I thought perhaps, if the Winters approved and would like to join us, you might come as my guest." Abigail's heart leaped at the prospect of seeing where he lived and worked. "I'd love to." "When is it?" "Christmas Eve," Isaiah replied. "I know it's a special night for family, but many of the Hands have no family nearby. Mr. Keller, he owns the Bar K, makes it a tradition to celebrate together." "I'll speak with Sarah and Harold," Abigail promised, "but I'm sure they'll agree. They've been encouraging me to see more of you." She blushed as she admitted this last part. Isaiah's smile was warm enough to melt the frost on the ground. "Have they now? And how do you feel about that encouragement, Miss Turner?" "I find I quite agree with them, Mr. Thompson," she replied, summoning her courage to meet his gaze directly. His expression softened, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand there in the public square. Instead, he simply said, "As do I, Abigail, as do I." Christmas Eve arrived with perfect winter weather. A light snowfall the night before had dusted Prescott in white. But the day dawned clear and bright, ideal for the journey to the Bar K ranch. Harold had arranged for a hired carriage, insisting it was more appropriate than having Abigail ride horseback to such an event, regardless of her proven abilities on the trail. Sarah helped her prepare, lending a beautiful forest green dress with velvet trim that complemented Abigail's auburn hair. "It's last year's fashion," Sarah explained as she arranged Abigail's hair in an elegant style, "but no one out here will know the difference." "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever worn," Abigail assured her, running her hands over the rich fabric. With her first month's salary from the academy, she had purchased proper undergarments and a warm cloak, but fine dresses were still beyond her means. "You look lovely," Sarah declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Isaiah won't be able to take his eyes off you." The Bar K Ranch was located about 10 miles outside Prescott, a substantial operation with a large main house, bunkhouse, barns, and corrals spread across a valley sheltered by pine-covered hills. As their carriage approached, Abigail could see other vehicles already arriving, lanterns glowing warmly against the early winter dusk. Isaiah waited for them at the entrance to the main house, dressed more formally than Abigail had ever seen him, a proper suit rather than his usual trail clothes, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. He helped first Sarah, then Harold from the carriage before turning to Abigail. As their eyes met, something passed between them, a recognition, a promise. "You look beautiful," he said softly as he offered his hand to help her down. "Thank you," she replied, equally quiet. "You look quite handsome yourself." The main house was decorated festively with pine boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. A massive Christmas tree dominated one corner of the large central room, decorated with paper stars, strings of cranberries, and small carved wooden ornaments. A long table had been set up for dinner, while another area was cleared for dancing, a small group of musicians tuning their instruments nearby. Isaiah introduced them to James Keller, the owner of the bar K, a robust man in his 50s with a booming laugh and shrewd eyes, and his wife Meredith, an elegant woman who welcomed them warmly. Abigail also met Hank, Miguel, Carlos, and Billy, all cleaned up and on their best behavior, though their genuine pleasure at seeing her again was evident. "Miss Turner's a real lady now," Billy declared admiringly. "Hardly recognized you without trail dust, madam." Dinner was a magnificent affair: roast beef, turkey, and all the trimmings, followed by mince pies and a flaming Christmas pudding that drew gasps of delight from the children present. Afterward, the musicians struck up a lively tune and the dancing began. Isaiah approached Abigail with formal courtesy. "May I have this dance, Miss Turner?" "You may, Mr. Thompson," she replied, placing her hand in his. He led her onto the floor with unexpected grace, his hand firm at her waist as they joined the other couples for a Virginia reel. "I didn't know you could dance," she commented as they moved through the steps. "My mother insisted I learn," he replied with a smile. "Said no son of hers would grow up without proper social graces, farm or no farm." They danced several more sets, occasionally partnering with others but always returning to each other. During a lively polka, Isaiah whirled her around the floor with such enthusiasm that she laughed aloud, the sound rising bright and clear above the music. It was only later, when he led her outside for a breath of fresh air, that she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had truly laughed like that with pure, uncomplicated joy. The night was cold but still, the stars brilliant against the black velvet sky. Isaiah led her to a small garden behind the house, where a stone bench had been cleared of snow. He draped his coat around her shoulders before they sat, the heavy wool warm from his body and smelling faintly of pine and leather. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "Very much," Abigail replied honestly. "It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you for inviting us." "There's something I wanted to talk to you about," Isaiah said after a moment, his tone growing more serious. "Something important." Abigail's heart quickened. "Yes, Mr. Keller has offered me a promotion," he began. "His foreman is retiring in the spring, moving to California to be near his daughter. He's asked me to take over the position." "Isaiah, that's wonderful," Abigail exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "You deserve it. It would mean staying here permanently," he continued. "A real home, not just moving from ranch to ranch with the seasons. Better pay, too." He turned to face her fully on the bench. "I've been saving every penny I could. With the foreman's position, I could afford a small place of my own within a year or two." The implication of his words hung in the cold night air between them. Not just a job, not just a home, but a future. A future that could, perhaps, include her. "Abigail," Isaiah said softly, taking her gloved hand in his, "I know it's soon. We've known each other barely 3 months, but I hope, you feel what I do." His eyes sought hers in the starlight. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that very first night in Julian when you looked at me with such courage despite your fear." Emotion swelled in Abigail's chest, too big to contain. "Isaiah, you don't need to answer now," he hurried on. "I know your past makes this complicated. I know you're just beginning to build your life in Prescott. I don't want to rush you or pressure you, but I wanted you to know where I stand, what I hope for." Abigail looked into his earnest face. this man who had rescued her from a life of degradation, yet never made her feel like a charity case or a damaged creature to be pitied. This man who had seen her at her most vulnerable, yet treated her with consistent respect and growing tenderness. This man who understood the value of freedom because he'd sought it himself after loss. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. "I never thought I could trust a man again after Julian. Never thought I could feel like this." Joy bloomed across Isaiah's features, transforming him. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his free hand to her cheek, his touch gentle through her glove. "May I kiss you, Abigail Turner?" "Yes," she breathed, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. Isaiah leaned forward, his lips meeting hers with exquisite gentleness. The kiss was brief, chaste even, yet it sent warmth spreading through her entire body despite the winter cold. When he drew back, his eyes were filled with such tenderness it nearly took her breath away. "I will never hurt you," he promised softly. "Never force you, never rush you. We have time, Abigail, all the time we need." Tears pricked at her eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of burgeoning love. She had spent 3 years at the Velvet Rose learning to fear men's desires, to view physical intimacy as something to endure rather than enjoy. In one gentle kiss, Isaiah had begun to heal that wound, showing her that desire could be mutual, respectful, founded on genuine affection rather than power and coin. "Thank you," she whispered, uncertain how to express all she was feeling. "For everything. For seeing me, really seeing me from the very beginning." They remained on the bench for a while longer, hands entwined, speaking of simple things, the beauty of the night, the music drifting from the house, plans for the coming year. When they finally returned to the celebration, Sarah gave Abigail a knowing look but said nothing, merely squeezing her hand with motherly affection. As they danced once more, moving together in perfect harmony, Abigail marveled at how dramatically her life had changed since that desperate night in Julian. From captivity to freedom, from despair to hope, from isolation to connection, each step had led her here, to this moment, to this man. The future still held challenges, she knew. Her past couldn't be erased entirely. There would always be the risk of someone from Julian recognizing her, of whispers and judgments. Isaiah's work was physically demanding and sometimes dangerous. Building a life together would require patience, hard work, and courage from them both. Yet for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach in Tucson 3 years ago, Abigail felt truly hopeful, not just for survival, but for happiness, for love, for the kind of life she had once thought forever beyond her reach. And as Isaiah's hand tightened gently around hers while they danced beneath the Christmas greenery, she allowed herself to believe that such a life might indeed be possible, one day at a time, one step at a time, together. Spring arrived in the Arizona territory with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the valleys and hillsides. Abigail had settled fully into her teaching position at the academy, earning the respect of her colleagues and the affection of her students. With her salary, she had moved from the winter's home to a small but comfortable room in a boarding house for respectable single women, though she still joined Sarah and Harold for Sunday dinners when Isaiah came to town. Their courtship had progressed steadily through the winter months, chaperoned outings to town events, quiet conversations by the winter's fireplace, letters exchanged during the weeks between visits. Isaiah had taken up his position as foreman at the Bar K, earning Mr. Keller's complete trust and the loyalty of the men under his supervision. On a perfect April Saturday, Isaiah arrived in Prescott earlier than usual, a nervous energy about him that Abigail couldn't quite interpret. He had arranged a picnic, He explained if she was agreeable, they could ride to a particularly beautiful spot overlooking the valley where the wildflowers were at their peak. Mrs. Perkins, the stern but fair-minded proprietress of Abigail's boarding house, raised an eyebrow at this suggestion but relented when Isaiah assured her they would return well before dusk and would remain in sight of the main road at all times. "That young man has serious intentions," she commented after Isaiah stepped outside to prepare the horses. "Mark my words." Abigail merely smiled, neither confirming nor denying, though her heart raced at the possibility. They had spoken often of the future in recent months, but always in general terms, never with specific commitments. Yet she had seen Isaiah speaking privately with Harold Winters the previous Sunday, and Sarah had been unusually excited when she'd hugged Abigail goodbye. They rode north of town, Abigail now comfortable and confident on horseback after months of regular riding. Isaiah led them to a small plateau overlooking the valley, where a grove of ponderosa pines provided dappled shade and the ground was carpeted with bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and golden poppies. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed as Isaiah helped her dismount. "How did you find this place?" "Part of a foreman's job is knowing every inch of the territory," he replied with a smile, spreading a blanket on a level spot surrounded by flowers. "I thought you might like it." The picnic was simple but delicious: cold chicken, fresh bread, early strawberries, and a bottle of lemonade that Sarah had prepared. They ate companionably, talking of small things: Abigail's students, Isaiah's work at the ranch, books they had recently read. Yet beneath the pleasant conversation, Abigail sensed a current of tension in Isaiah, a nervous energy she'd never observed in him before. His hand trembled slightly as he poured the lemonade, and twice he began to speak, then stopped himself. "Isaiah," she finally said gently, "is something troubling you?" He set down his cup, meeting her eyes with that direct gaze she had come to love. "Not troubling, no, but important." He took a deep breath. "Abigail, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart skipped as he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I spoke with Harold last Sunday, asked for his blessing as your guardian of sorts. He and Sarah both gave it gladly." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond flanked by tiny pearls. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "One of the few things I kept when I sold the farm." With careful movements, Isaiah shifted to one knee beside the blanket, holding the ring between them. "Abigail Turner, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had suspected this might be coming, the reality of the moment, the sincerity in his eyes, the slight tremor in his voice, the perfect beauty of the setting overwhelmed her. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision of his beloved face. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Isaiah, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he took her left hand and gently slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "I love you, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to spend every day of our lives together making you happy, keeping you safe, helping you be as free and strong as you were meant to be." "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily now after months of growing certainty. She reached for him, cupping his face between her hands. "You gave me back my life, my hope, my future. Now I want to build that future with you, whatever it brings." Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that had been carefully banked during their courtship. Isaiah's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Abigail's hands moved to his shoulders, feeling the strength there that had protected her that night in Julian and every day since. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaiah pressed his forehead to hers. "I want you to be sure," he murmured. "Your position at the school is secure," she assured him. "Headmaster Collins has already told me that several of our teachers are married women. As long as my work remains excellent, my marital status won't affect my employment." Relief flickered across his face. "I wouldn't ask you to give up teaching. I know how much it means to you." His consideration touched her deeply. So many men would have expected their wives to abandon any profession, focusing solely on home and family. That Isaiah understood her need for meaningful work outside the home only confirmed what she already knew: he was a rare man indeed. "When?" she asked, glancing down at the ring glittering on her finger. "When should we marry?" "I've been saving for a small house," Isaiah explained. "There's a piece of land for sale not far from town, close enough for you to continue at the academy, but with enough acreage for horses and maybe a few cattle of my own someday. If you like it, I could have a modest home built by autumn." "Autumn would be perfect," Abigail agreed, imagining golden leaves and cool breezes, a fresh start as the year began to wane. "That gives us time to plan properly, and for me to complete the school term." They spent the remainder of the afternoon in that beautiful spot, making plans and sharing dreams, occasionally stopping for kisses that grew increasingly difficult to keep within the bounds of propriety. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and mounted their horses for the return to town. Abigail touched the ring on her finger, still hardly believing this was real. 3 years in captivity at the Velvet Rose, then freedom found in the most unexpected way through a cowboy with gentle hands and an honorable heart, who had wrapped her in his coat and promised protection that terrible night in Julian. Now he was promising something even more precious: a lifetime of love, respect, and partnership. A chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of her past. A future bright with possibility and hope. As they rode back toward Prescott side by side, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and rose, Abigail offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the twisted path that had somehow led her exactly where she was meant to be, beside the man she loved, riding toward home. The wedding took place on a perfect October day, with aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Arizona sky, and a crisp breeze carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The small white church in Prescott was filled with well-wishers: Abigail's colleagues from the academy, Isaiah's friends from the bar, the Winters and their circle, and a special surprise: Mrs. Walsh, who had traveled all the way from Julian for the occasion. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world," the older woman declared, embracing Abigail tightly. "When Isaiah's letter arrived telling me he was marrying the girl he'd rescued from that awful place, well, I just had to see it with my own eyes." Mrs. Walsh had brought news from Julian as well, news that lifted a weight from Abigail's shoulders. The Velvet Rose had been closed down following a raid by federal marshals investigating white slavery across the territory. Madame Lucille was in prison awaiting trial, and Vernon Pike had fled, last seen heading for the Mexican border with a posse in pursuit. "You needn't fear them anymore," Mrs. Walsh assured her. "That chapter of your life is truly over now." Sarah stood as Abigail's matron of honor, while Hank served as Isaiah's best man. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with Abigail wearing a cream-colored gown that Sarah had helped her make and carrying a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Isaiah waited at the altar in a new black suit, his face transforming with joy as she walked toward him on Harold's arm. Their vows were traditional, yet spoken with such evident sincerity that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with restrained tenderness, mindful of their audience yet unable to hide the depth of his feelings. The celebration afterward was held at their new home, a modest but well-built 2-story house on 10 acres just outside town. The main floor was complete, though the upstairs bedroom still needed finishing touches. The large yard had been cleared for the occasion, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns strung for when evening fell. Mr. and Mrs. Keller had gifted them with 2 fine horses as a wedding present. Harold and Sarah provided a beautiful dining table and chairs. Headmaster Collins and the other teachers gave them a set of bookshelves and several volumes to begin their library. Hank and the ranch hands had crafted a sturdy porch swing, while Mrs. Walsh contributed handmade quilts and linens. As twilight descended, and the celebration continued with music and dancing on the makeshift floor in the yard, Isaiah drew Abigail away for a moment of privacy on their new front porch. "Happy, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream." Isaiah's fingers gently tilted her chin up until their eyes met. "Not a dream," he promised, "though I sometimes wonder what I did to deserve such happiness." "You were kind," Abigail said simply. "When kindness was rare and precious, you saw value in me when I'd forgotten it existed." His kiss was tender, a promise of the night to come when they would finally be alone, but also of all the days and nights stretching ahead a lifetime to build together, to heal old wounds, to create new memories that would gradually overshadow the painful past. Later, after the guests had departed with final congratulations and well wishes, after Mrs. Walsh and the Winters had returned to town, Isaiah carried Abigail across the threshold of their new home, a tradition his mother had insisted was essential for good luck in a marriage. In the privacy of their bedroom, with only candlelight illuminating the space, initial nervousness gave way to tenderness, and tenderness to passion. Isaiah was endlessly patient, achingly gentle, helping Abigail discover that physical love could indeed be beautiful when built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay entwined in the afterglow, the moonlight casting silver patterns through the curtains. "My brave, beautiful Abigail." "And I love you," she replied, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from captivity to freedom, from despair to hope, from isolation to this profound connection. "My Isaiah, who promised freedom and delivered so much more." 1 year later, Abigail stood on the front porch of their home, watching Isaiah work with a young colt in the corral nearby. The October afternoon was warm, golden light bathing the landscape and gleaming on her husband's dark hair as he moved with the horse, his movements patient and sure. In the year since their wedding, they had settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Abigail continued teaching at the academy, while Isaiah divided his time between his foreman duties at the barquet and developing their own small ranch. They had added a stable, expanded the garden, and finished the upstairs bedrooms, creating a home that welcomed frequent visitors from town and provided a peaceful haven for themselves. Absently, Abigail rested her hand on the gentle swell of her abdomen, still small enough to be hidden by her loose dress but definitely present. The baby wasn't expected until early spring, and they had decided to wait until Christmas to announce the news to their friends. Isaiah looked up, seeming to sense her gaze. He secured the colt, then walked toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. Even after a year of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart quicken. Taking a break, he asked, climbing the porch steps to join her. Headmaster Collins insisted I leave early, she explained. Said I looked tired and should rest. She smiled ruefully. I suspect Sarah may have spoken to him. She's convinced I'm doing too much. Isaiah's hand joined hers, warm and protective over the tiny life growing within her. Are you doing too much? No, Abigail assured him. I feel wonderful, truly, just a little more tired than usual. His concerned expression eased, replaced by a tender smile. Our son is already looking out for his mother, then, or daughter, Abigail countered with a raised eyebrow. They had a running, friendly debate about the baby's gender, though both agreed that health was all that truly mattered. Isaiah laughed, drawing her into his arms. Son or daughter, this child will have the most remarkable mother any child could wish for. And the most devoted father, Abigail added, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Sometimes I can hardly believe how fortunate we are, how far we've come. It had not always been easy. There had been difficult moments, nightmares that still occasionally plagued Abigail, days when memories of the velvet rose surfaced unexpectedly, times when intimacy required patience and reassurance. Yet they had faced each challenge together, with honest communication and unwavering commitment to each other's happiness. Remember what Mrs. Walsh told us on our wedding day? Isaiah asked, stroking her hair. That the best marriages are those where both people have known sorrow, because they never take joy for granted. Abigail nodded against his chest. She was right. Every day with you feels like a gift, Isaiah, a precious gift I never expected to receive. He tilted her face up to his expression serious yet filled with love. That night in Julian, when you ran into me outside the livery stable, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. I just knew I couldn't let you go back to that place, couldn't let Pike hurt you. His thumb gently traced her cheekbone. Now I know it was the most important decision I ever made. For me as well, Abigail whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. The night I escaped the brothel in tears, and you wrapped me in your coat and promised freedom that was the beginning of everything good in my life. They stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, the late afternoon sun washing the land in golden light, the future stretching before them bright with promise. Whatever challenges might come in life would surely bring more, they would face them as they had faced all others. Together, with courage, faith, and abiding love. For Abigail had escaped not only a brothel but a life of despair and resignation. And Isaiah had found not only a wife but a purpose greater than himself. Together, they had created something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts, a love story written across the wild frontier of Arizona. A testament to the power of kindness, courage, and second chances in an often unforgiving world.